having a focus on price and getting value out of what you're offering is a very important thing.
Coffee's for closers only.
So we've established my proposal is sound in principle. Now we're just haggling over price.
Let's see how much we're going for on eBay.
Man, it's the same as Dunkin' Donuts. Costs 15 times the price.
Today's podcast is sponsored by Jennings Executive Search. I had a great conversation with John Jennings about the skills needed in different pricing roles. He and I think a lot alike. If you're looking for a new pricing role, or if you're trying to hire just the right pricing person, I strongly suggest you reach out to Jennings Executive Search. They specialize in placing pricing people. Say that 3 times fast. Welcome to Impact Pricing, the podcast where we discuss pricing, value, and the direct relationship between them. I'm Mark Stiving, and our guest today is Nikhil Kotcharlakota. Sorry, Nikhil.
No, you good.
And here are 3 things you want to know about Nikhil before we start. He spent a lot of years as the head of pricing at Electrolux, so he's got tons of pricing experience. He's currently the co-founder of a startup called PriceOps, and I'm looking forward to hearing what he's doing. And he is proud to be a dad of a 3-year-old with another on the way, which means he's probably not sleeping all that much. Welcome, Nikhil.
All right. Thank you, Mark. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. How'd you get into pricing?
Well, to be honest, I stumbled into pricing. I was a civil engineer long time ago. Then I moved to the US to do my MBA. And as soon as I got done with my MBA, the first job I landed was as a pricing analyst at Electrolux. That's kind of how I went into it. Pricing was never my focus. But as soon as I got the role and I started working in pricing, I just fell in love with it. The best part about pricing is it's always at the center of the strategy, or you get to work with a lot of teams, product management, sales, accounting, finance. Literally every team in the company. I just learned a lot about what Electrolux does, about how pricing can impact the bottom line. So I just fell in love with it, and I've been there for a long time.
So I think everybody just falls into pricing. And so that was a great example or story. It's funny because I don't know that I've ever said this before. I have a PhD in pricing. Right.
Yeah. Yep.
And so the reason I work in pricing today isn't because of my PhD. Well, in a way it is. It's because I was the CEO of a failed company and I had to get a job. And so I could claim to be a pricing expert. I get a job as a pricing person at a company, and suddenly I learn what pricing really is. It was just fabulous to see the entire scope of pricing as we go through this. So excellent.
Absolutely.
Now, I'm really curious, what does PriceOps do? So I take it you haven't released the product yet from what I've seen on your LinkedIn page.
Yes, it's not out yet. We are actually in the building phase, and we are pretty close to an MVP or a launch, maybe mid-January to end January. So.
And what are you doing? What is PriceOps going to do that other systems aren't doing today?
Yeah. So PriceOps, we are actually building a tool that's focused mainly for SaaS companies, where we provide the entire pricing process in one location, essentially starting with willingness to pay studies, price strategy setting, price modeling, which could be multiple price models that's out there. And even we suggest a few price models, price analytics, and price execution. So finally, the price execution is providing the APIs into the websites, or connecting with the ERP systems, or even connecting with the billing system. So we are trying to provide this full end-to-end process for pricing, and that's kind of what PriceOps is doing, especially for SaaS companies.
That feels like a big thing to bite off. Pretty big.
It is, Mark. And then that's kind of why the MVP, or what I call it, like something that we are about to launch, has kind of been slightly pushed down the mark, just because we've been trying to build as fast as possible and spend a lot of time here. But it is a lot, right? It's a huge chunk to bite off. And that's kind of what we are trying to build, though. So let's see how it goes.
Yeah. So there are a lot of companies, Chargeify, Chargebee, Zora. These guys do SaaS billing exceptionally well, right? They've been doing it forever. And so then they'll give you your SaaS metrics on the back end. But what they're not doing is helping you figure out what's the right price point for your product, or what's the right pricing model for your product.
Exactly.
And so what I just heard you say, that's what we're going to focus on.
Yes, absolutely. So the price modeling, like that will be the core engine, Mark. Like that's kind of what we are building. And actually, the even better part is as you keep using the product, and as the data comes into the product, the idea is we will consume the data and suggest a good price model. Meaning, most SaaS companies today probably use the per user price or flat pricing to go with, right? And they focus so less on price just because, again, there could be several reasons: lack of expertise, lack of time to go to market, or whatnot. So per user is the most commonly used price model. But what we are trying to provide is usage-based pricing, outcome-based pricing. I mean, even custom pricing, for example, because certain companies do create their own price metric and build a custom model. So we are trying to provide that and give a suggestion out based on the data saying, hey, you're using per user, but here's what you could use to maybe make more revenue or more profit, depending on what the optimization factor is.
Yeah. So one of the things I find, the companies who are born in the cloud seem to do really well, but companies who aren't born in the cloud, they don't do that much usage monitoring. Because I'd often ask them, okay, so do you have usage data? And they're like, no, not really. I know how many times someone logged in, and that's it. And so what I just heard you say is that we need companies who are collecting usage data of different features, different capabilities, so we can then correlate that with the rest of the billing and the pricing that's going on.
That's right. Yeah. So, I mean, to your point, it is if if our customers or the companies are figuring out their usage metrics or how their features are being used, then yes, we can provide the best usage based pricing model or the price level that can optimize their revenue. We did go down the rabbit hole of figuring out, can we add in a usage based like metering feature, but that's something that's going to come down the line. For now, it's focused on price optimization.
And there are so many companies who do that. You just need to get that data. You don't need to go compete with them.
Exactly. You're absolutely right.
Similarly, you don't need to go compete with ChargeBee and Chargeify and Zora, right? You let those guys do billing, and we'll manage the pricing piece of that. So that makes a lot of sense to me. Now, you said a word that kind of excites me, but I've never seen it work successfully, with the exception of financial worlds, and that is outcome-based pricing.
Yes.
So can you think of any time when outcome-based pricing works other than a company like PayPal?
Yeah. So, I mean, to be honest, I think that's where the struggle is, right? Like outcome-based pricing has been there for a while, and I guess like some folks have used it and want to use it. But where I think it can really help is even in the SaaS world, Mark. Like even if you take our tool, for example, right? Like we want to actually go live with a outcome-based pricing model, and I've been racking my brain on what's the best approach. But ideally, we want, like, of course, we have to define what the outcome is, but and be able to measure it. But I think that's where the challenges are, right? Like depending on the customer, outcome can vary. Depending on the company, the outcome can vary. So that's where a little bit of challenges. But as a pricing optimization tool, we can provide maybe maximizing revenue or revenue increase year over year. Like that could be an outcome that we can use. So SaaS companies can probably be a great example where outcome-based pricing can be executed. Like for example, I mean, you can take anyone, right? Like whether it's like Calendly and all these organization softwares. Like it's less about the number of meetings, but maybe how easy it made your life to schedule the meeting, right? Like that could be the outcome. However, again, the challenge, of course, comes down to how do you measure the outcome and how do you then monetize it. But I think SaaS companies are a great example. Another one is consulting. Again, just like consulting experts, even as a pricing consultant or any consultant, management consultant for that matter. When we work on a project, it's less about the number of hours you put in, more about the outcome of the outcome of the project that we delivered. So.
So although I agree with everything you just said, I find it really, really challenging because here's the biggest problem I've always had, even as a pricing person. I walk into a company and I say, look, we're going to tweak pricing and, you're going to make 5% of your revenue in additional profit because of the pricing changes we're going to make. And so let's say that you actually deliver that. And at the end of the next year, you've got an extra 5% of revenue that went straight to the bottom line. And the salespeople stand up and say, no, that was us, right? We did a better job selling. And the marketing folks end up, no, that was our new marketing campaign that we just put in place. That wasn't pricing, right? And so it's just so hard to decouple one pricing in particular from anything else that I find outcome-based pricing really challenging.
Yeah, I mean, you're spot on, Mark. I mean, you hit the nail on the head there. Like, there are so many things that can affect the total revenue or even the total price game, right? Like, we can launch a new product with a higher price, but that can actually be because the sales team did a great job selling the higher price SKU or a model or even a upsold product. So you're absolutely right. And that's where the challenges are with outcome. But that's kind of what I'm trying to play around with and use different examples to figure out if that can actually be doable, right? Because, I think that's the next step when we go value-based. So,
I was going to say, if you're open to some advice, I would focus on usage-based now as you put your MVP out, because it's something that we all see. It's real, right? No one can say I didn't use more of the product.
Yeah.
And ideally that is highly correlated with the value your customers are getting with the product.
No, you're absolutely, again, that is right. And that's kind of where we are focused on too, meaning we'll obviously launch with a few models and usage-based pricing is one of them. Outcome is something that's like almost like a pet project of mine because I'm really interested in that, but that's something that we are not going to stop the MVP for that. So you're absolutely right, Mark. And any kind of advice I'm more open for. So.
No worries. What other models besides usage-based or user-based, what other models are you thinking that you're looking at?
I mean, flat rate, of course, is like the simplest one, I guess. But flat rate and per active user, per seat, or one other thing which we thought about was per persona, right? Like depending on the user persona that the companies actually define, there could be a different pricing based on that. I mean, just because different user personas use the product in a different way and they actually extract value in a different way, that could actually be another model as well.
Yeah. And so the example I would use for that is Salesforce.com. The salespeople probably get a ton of value and sales administrators get value, but nowhere near the value that salespeople would get.
Absolutely. And the same thing with like pricing optimization softwares, right? Like pricing managers or pricing team is probably the most, the team that's going to use it the most. But there is product management, there is sales, and there's CFOs and the finance team. So each one could be priced differently.
Yeah, fascinating. So do you have recommendations? Have you figured out, I mean, part of the issue with the software is you have to come back and say, now I'm going to make a recommendation on how to do this. And so I'll just ask you the question, how do you recommend the difference between per user and per active user? And so I'll ask it in the following way. Sometimes per user probably makes sense. Sometimes per active user probably makes sense. And how would the software make that an algorithm?
Yeah, so I mean, that's something that we are actually trying to, again, right now figure out, right? But the idea is our customer or the companies that we are going to provide this solution for are tracking that, meaning how many active users are there and how many users are there. So as we get that information, we are going to continue to consume it. We will have a revenue target or a profit target to go optimize for. And that's kind of what we will play around and suggest which one's better, right? Like based on the number of customers you have and the number of active users or total number of users, which gives you the revenue in the fastest or the simplest way, or what is the price point even? Like what is the price point at which you can achieve your revenue target in a per user model, or what's your price point at which you'll achieve your target in a per active user model. So the idea was to then suggest those and see which one makes the most sense for the company.
Okay. And that assumes we have a revenue target. And I certainly like thinking about pricing from a value side, right? What's the value to my customer? How does my customer think about what I'm offering? Because I know that Salesforce doesn't charge a different price for administrators versus salespeople.
Yeah.
Right. They just have a straight per user price.
That's right.
Which I got to say is I used to be a customer of Salesforce a long time ago, and I hated that. Right. It made no sense to me that they would price it that way, because we didn't get as much value from those people.
Yep. I mean, that's another kind of, I'd call it rabbit hole, or actually something that we've explored is when we actually talk about that, Mark, and again, you're absolutely spot on, is how do you actually then do value modeling and monitoring value, right? And I know there are a few companies out there, and we have to then connect with them to go figure out what's the value modeling and how do you define your value metrics. But that's once you define that, that's when then you can say, okay, this is your value, and then you optimize for that value.
You are in for a wild ride here, Nikhil.
Yes, sir. I know. I mean, it's yeah. I'm looking forward to it, and I'm dreading it at the same time. Yes.
So we had a very brief chat before we started, and one of the things we were talking about was the difference between traditional business and SaaS. What did you learn, or what were your big aha moments as you were starting to make this shift from more traditional pricing into subscription-based pricing?
Yeah, I mean, the big aha moments, I'd say, the few, right? Like one, the biggest aha I see is how the skills are transferable between traditional to SaaS, right? Like I'm a big believer that pricing is a mindset. So when someone works as a pricing analyst, pricing manager, whether it's in a traditional role or in the subscription or SaaS business, it's a mindset that you develop where you're focused on working with different parts of the company, learning what they do, learning what the product is and what value the product delivers to the customer, and then come up with a price point. So all these skill set, the soft skills that we can learn through the jobs here, I think that's a skill that's completely transferable between traditional and SaaS. So I think that's one of my major ahas is there's a lot of skill set that can be transferable between the two. There of course are major differences as well. Like what are the different price, like SaaS has different price models, right? Like we talked about it, per user or per active user, usage based, outcome based, and so on, which obviously don't exist in a traditional setting. It's mostly per unit. I know some companies are getting into subscription, but again, it's per unit pricing, and it's completely different to the SaaS side of it. But again, those are the big, and reporting is very different. You do it per SKU. Here in the SaaS world, of course, there's a lot of metrics that can tell you whether pricing is effective or not, like net dollar retention, the churn, ARR, MRR. There's so many metrics and insights that those metrics can provide on the SaaS side of it.
Yeah. So when I made the transition, or I shouldn't say transition, but when I made the leap to learn about it, I would say the single biggest learning I had is the title of my book, Win, Keep, Grow. And that is that we're managing 3 revenue streams, not 1 revenue stream, right? In traditional, it's always, we got to go win new customers, got to go win new customers, got to go win new customers. Mm-hmm. And as soon as we go to subscriptions, we better keep our customers and we better grow our customers. So
Yeah. And one other shift though I've actually seen as my journey at Electrolux as well, and some of the other companies, even on the traditional side and manufacturing side, I've seen, Mark, is they're now focused on the customer 360 experience, right? Like from the life cycle of when the customer comes on board or a consumer for them through the time where they actually go buy another product. Because what's happening there too is companies have realized consumer is king, right? So they're trying to build an experience for the consumer so they go continue to buy the same product over and over again. So actually in a traditional setting too, the keep piece can be a very key revenue metric. Like how do you retain customers, because customer lifetime value is going up and so on. So I think, again, that there are definitely similarities and differences there. For sure.
Yeah, I think the keep in a traditional business really depends on how often someone buys a product from you.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right.
Because if they're not going to buy, but every 5 years, you're probably like, okay, it's just a new purchase decision after 5 years.
Yeah.
But
yeah, for sure.
So nice. You also said, hey, I want to talk a little bit about pricing operations. Why do you love pricing operations? By the way, I used to work with pricing operations teams. I get it. And they're very valuable, very useful, but why would you want to talk about them?
Yeah. So what I felt, again, this is more in the last 10 years in my role, with whether it's Electrolux and different things I've learned. Most focus is on price strategy, right? Because that's very important. That's a very key part of the company strategy, having a price strategy. But where I see a lot of companies struggle or face some difficulties actually going and executing the strategy, right? So if the operations are not set up properly, or if there are no processes for the pricing team, a strategy might be there, but they might not be able to execute on the strategy, which will then result in loss in price or price leakage, right? And I've seen this happen. I've learned it firsthand as well, and I figured out the importance of that operations piece, having a processes, having a good set of operations to go execute in the ERP systems and so on. So I think that's where my love of operations comes from, is I see the importance of operations to go execute on the strategy.
Okay, so I agree 100%. Price execution is really important. And typically what we would do is we would be watching scatter plots of deals that come through. We would find the deals that are way out of norm, figure out what caused it, see if we can tweak our processes to fix that, whatever that happens to be. Or we say that was a good decision, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
One or the other. But and we're watching ASPs. But you're right. Pricing strategy is fun and interesting and hard, but without execution, this doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
yeah. And that's where
nice.
I see a lack of focus as well for certain companies, right? Like, again, I spoke to a lot of them. So like when you see that, okay, focus is on strategy, but operations kind of get neglected just because, again, it's operations and it's a little tedious to do, but I think it adds a lot of value.
Oh, and we know what 1% adds, right? It's a huge number. So operations can easily drop 1% or 2% just from not doing a good job. So
absolutely.
All right, Nikhil, we're gonna have to start wrapping up, and I'm going to ask the final question. What's the one piece of pricing advice you would give our listeners that you think could have a big impact on their business?
Wow. Okay. I mean, there's a lot, right? I think one, having a having a pricing team, dedicated pricing team that's focused on executing your pricing strategy, and going one step further, having a pricing strategy in itself. I think those are the two very important things. And even for early stage startups, right? Like sometimes folks forget, like, okay, let early stage startups like create a product, go to market, offer it for free, but they're essentially leaving a lot of value on the table or a lot of money on the table. So I think having a focus on price and getting value out of what you're offering is a very important thing.
So I think that's great advice. Now, you happen to be a pricing expert, or at least aficionado, as you said. And so I'm sure you haven't hired a pricing person in your company yet. But
yes. Yeah. But I mean, because I'm still there. Yes.
Well, but here's the question. At what revenue point do you think it makes sense to hire a pricing person? And by the way, I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'll share my answer after you get done.
Yep. I mean, to be honest, it's difficult to say, Mark, like what's the revenue point or whatnot. But just to simplify, or if you try to categorize companies in a certain way, maybe even if it gets to a $2 million or even a $5 million mark, right? Like from an ARR standpoint, like you're already getting to a point where you're losing, where you're leaving money on the table. So I think maybe that's when someone should start thinking about having a dedicated person or a team focused on pricing. But again, it really depends.
Yep. Well, let's go through the math real fast. If you've got a $5 million revenue company, and let's say that by focusing on pricing and value, you could boost 5% of that revenue, which doesn't change your costs. So that's $250,000, which would easily pay the salary of a pricing person. I think the problem we have at that point is that the pricing people who join $5 million companies aren't the best pricing people. So they may not be able to get that 250K. And there's so much demand for pricing people nowadays. But I don't disagree with the thought process at all. What I tend to see is a company's probably 50 to 100 million before they start focusing on pricing, which is probably too late.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's where you're right. I mean, and that's the reason why a lot of companies, and I spoke to a few recently as well, they don't publish their pricing on their web pages and whatnot, because it's easier for them to then make a deal like offline and not worry about what's the impact of pricing for their bottom line or even top line.
Yeah, awesome. Hey, Nikhil, thank you so much for your time today. If anybody wants to contact you, how can they do that?
They can contact me via LinkedIn. Pretty active there, so LinkedIn.
Okay, and we'll put your URL, your LinkedIn URL in the show notes. And my guess is you are the only one with your last name. So as long as we spell it right, we're in good shape.
Absolutely, Mark. Yes, and thanks a lot for having me. Yeah.
Oh, you're very welcome. And to our listeners, thank you so much for doing your job, listening. And if you enjoyed this, please leave us a rating and a review. The easiest way is to go to ratethispodcast.com/impact pricing. A person named Sarnblad on Apple Podcasts figured out how to leave a review and said, "Pricing genius. I started listening to Impact Pricing after meeting Mark at a conference. It takes a special kind of brilliance to have a vast knowledge of your subject and still be able to break it down so that it's simple enough to be both understood and instantly useful. Thanks, Mark. I will keep listening." Thank you, Sarnblad. And the check is in the mail. No one ever writes that nice of things about me, so I appreciate it. And finally, if you have any questions or comments about the podcast or pricing in general, feel free to email me, mark@impactpricing.com. Now, go make an impact. Thanks again to Jennings Executive Search for sponsoring our podcast. If you're looking to hire someone in pricing, I suggest you contact someone who knows pricing people. Contact Jennings Executive Search. Don't forget to attend our workshop, How to Fearlessly Raise Prices Now. Go to impactpricing.com/RPN.